Hello, my name is Edward and welcome to my very first Python programming video. In this tutorial, I would like to go over a very basic programming concept known as the variable, and then I will go over the four of the most basic data types, and then at the very end I will have a demonstration of the lesson. I hope you enjoy it. Well, variables are defined as a reserved space in memory in which we can store values or data. And data is just really any information we're using in our program. And that could be maybe today's date, the calendar date, or maybe the coordinates of the mouse cursor. Really any type of data or information we're using. So data can be classified into four basic categories. And I'll just name them out here. Integers, strings, booleans, and floating points. So let's start with integers. Integers are any whole number you're dealing with. So 1, 5, 9, even a negative number, negative 10. But the point is there's no decimal point. Moving on, we have the floating point, and this is often abbreviated as a float. So you'll see that both ways, but we'll call it a float. It's a little bit easier to say that. But a floating point is a number that has a decimal point, such as 2.5, 3.14, just 2.0. So that's pretty easy to pick up. Okay, next we have the string. And strings are just sequences of characters. So if you have a paragraph of maybe an essay or maybe a sentence, someone you want to have if you have a game and you want to have a character saying something, that'd be a string. And even one character could be a string. And we'll see. The only thing that really defines a string is that it's in quotation marks. Next up, we have booleans. And booleans are actually very simple because they can only have two values, true and false. Now, when would you really want to use this, you might ask? Well, they're actually very common in games, such as if you maybe have an asteroids game and an asteroid is colliding with a spaceship, you can say if the asteroid is intersecting with the spaceship, if that's true, have something happen, have an explosion, play a sound. Actually, they're very common in games. Also, maybe the clicking of a mouse, many events such as that. But that's it. That's all. Those are all of our data types. And now let's get into a demonstration. Okay, so now at least you should have a basic understanding of what variables are, and you know the four basic data types. Okay, so the first thing you should do is open up your compiler, as I've done, and I'm running Python 3.3.2. Okay, so when making a variable in Python, the first thing you always do is write a variable declaration statement. And now, what is a variable declaration statement? It's just a fancy way of saying that you're giving your variable a name and assigning it a value. So let's do that. So the first thing you want to do is give a name. I'll just write a variable name such as Apple. This can be any sequence of characters, but it can't have any spaces in your variable name. So the next thing, this is optional, but I like to have a space here. And it's considered good practice to do that. It just makes your code a little bit neater and easier to read. Okay, this next part is it's just an equal sign, but it's a fancy term that is called an assignment operator. And one equal sign in Python is always an assignment operator. You're just assigning a value, which we will give here, to a variable name. So the next part is a value, and you can give it any of those data types we just went over, but there's also plenty of other data types. So don't think those are the only data types, because there are hundreds of others. But let's just give it an integer. It's the most basic type. So now our variable has been created in a space in memory, or sorry, a space in memory has is being referred to with this name, and it has a value of 13. Okay, so now let's access this variable. So the easiest way to do that is to just display it onto the screen. So I will do that just by writing print parenthesis apple. We'll be going over functions, because the syntax of functions later. But just copy down what I have here, and you'll know more about it later. So now press return, and the value of apple will be displayed onto the screen. But of course, apple could have had another value. We can make it a string, we can make it a boolean, we can make it a floating point. We can actually redefine that variable. Like this. So we just write another declaration statement. We're redefining it. We can make it a string here, quotation marks. And as I was saying before, a string is defined by these quotation marks. If you don't close it, you'll get an error. So you want to make sure you follow that same form. You can press return. Now apple has a different value than it did before. It has a string of the text apple. So we can just do that. We can just print it out just as we did before. Apple. Another thing I wanted to go over was picking names for variables and common ways of writing out names. Okay, as I said before, you can't have spaces in your variables, but there is a way you can get around it. There are actually two ways. The first is to use a practice called camel case. It's commonly used in programming, and it just looks like this: apple, pie. You see we have two words, apple and pie, but when we start this second word, we have a capital letter, and if we could have three words, like apple pie dish. And as you can see the pattern, the first letter of every new word, we have a capital letter. And you can just set that to something else. It's a boolean. It's one of our data types. So that's one of the ways. And now the other way is to use underscores, and I'm not sure, but hopefully you're familiar with that symbol. And we would do it the same way, like this: apple pie dish, like this. Another boolean we have here. But as you can see, these are actually different variables. We're not redefining it. These are separate. So this wraps up our first introduction, my first introductory video into Python, and hopefully you have a very basic understanding of variables, and I will be going more in depth in future tutorials. Thank you for your time, and if you like this video, please comment, rate, and subscribe. Thank you.